The time is now 6:43. We will start the Tuesday, July 6, 2021 Special Finance and Purchasing Committee. Roll call, please.
Alderman Moiseo? Here. Alderman Hayes?
Here.
Alderman Florian?
Here.
Alderman Rivera?
He's coming.
Say yes. Yes. Alderman Newsom?
Aye. Says Committee of the Whole. Are we supposed to have all the aldermen? Are we supposed to have all the aldermen, Ms. Janet? Says Committee of the Whole. Are we supposed to have all the aldermen here?
Then yes.
Can we get all the aldermen, please? Alderman Bolton, Alderman Kirkwood, Alderman Seeger. Oh, he's here.
There'll be no vote. There'll be no action. It's just a procedural information meeting.
Yes.
Sorry, did not supposed to be here.
Committee of the Whole. We have, you want to look at that and run down that?
Committee on the whole.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Thank you.
Roll call. Alderman Seeger?
Aye.
Alderman Moiseo?
Here.
Alderman Kirkwood?
Here.
Alderman Newsom?
Present.
Alderman Turner?
Here.
Alderman Rivera?
Present.
Alderman Florian?
Here.
Alderman Hayes?
Present.
Alderman Bolton?
Present.
Thank you. Old business being none. Item A, discussion of budget appropriation ordinance and revenue certification for the fiscal year May 1st, 2021 to April 30th, 2022. And I am going to turn it over to Mr. Don Schultz.
Thank you, Alderman.
Can you scoot down?
Public hearing was held on July 1st, and many of you had an opportunity to review the budget at that time. So this is our second review of the budget. You know, the creation of this budget is certainly not an exact science. It's a difficult, long, time-consuming process. It doesn't take place within a vacuum. It's affected by a number of factors within and outside the government. And a budget, as you would expect, evolves. And it's made to guide our actions and change over time as circumstances change. The world, in terms of the budget, is not perfect. There's no ideal setting for this budget. In a perfect world, we would have unlimited resources. We'd be able to forecast accurately. We would have guaranteed results of all of our actions. That we know is not the case. Forecasting is imperfect. The needs of the city far outweigh our resources, and our plans oftentimes do not hit their mark. The past year has been difficult for our nation, for our state, and for our community. 85 businesses, tax-paying businesses, closed between 2019 and 2020. We see that with the number of business licenses. 6% of our businesses closed, many never to reopen. Hotel-motel tax saw a decline of almost 55% due to restrictions on travel and on occupancy. Gaming tax revenues from gaming machines took a loss of $333,000 compared to the prior year, almost 30%. Now, even though these are dire numbers, it speaks volumes, I think, about what happened to the economy due to COVID, due to the pandemic that affected businesses. Such is not expected in fiscal year 22. In fact, many learned economists are projecting a robust economy in this year. They're expecting businesses to reopen and revenues to be on the upswing. We have such a projection in our fiscal year 22 budget. very uncertain times. It's made the budget difficult. But what you find is presentation of a budget that's balanced across all funds. Citywide budget is $181 million across 7 different fund groups. We may show deficits on a budget basis only because certain revenues were collected in prior years to be spent in the current year. Total revenues will measure about $178 million against $181 million expenditure, with those balances being offset by available cash. We will talk primarily in terms of cash, not fund balance. Fund balance is simply the difference between assets and liabilities. We know many of our assets are not liquid. You can't spend them. It's like on an individual basis. Your home is an asset. Your car is an asset. Your furniture is an asset. But you can't spend those items. The same thing in the city. So when we talk about there being deficits, I'm going to look at it from a position of cash. And on a cash basis, what we'll see across all the funds is that the town is very liquid. The city has certainly far enough cash available to meet the demands in fiscal year 22. In putting together the budget, the mayor had certain priorities. One, of course, was to identify the needs of the community and prioritize their spending. She has a requirement of departments to control costs. And that's going to be primarily through active oversight. Oversight by department heads, by the finance department, and of course by the city council and the mayor's office. We're going to monitor spending on a monthly basis. You'll be receiving reports on a monthly basis of activity, of actual results compared to budget, and what current cash balances are. We're going to be monitoring revenues on an ongoing basis and address any shortages in our projections by adjusting expenditures accordingly. We're going to try to identify and eliminate any duplicative work functions, jobs that are being performed by multiple people that can be consolidated. We're going to improve efficiencies by cross-training personnel in departments. We're going to do our best to improve communications not only with the board but among the departments themselves so that everyone works together and they communicate together. And we've been tasked with the responsibility of producing a 5-year plan so that we're budgeting on a multi-year basis rather than from year to year. We don't need to concern ourselves so much with finances in fiscal year 22, or even next year for that matter. We know we'll get through this year, we'll get through next year. What is of concern to us and what should be of concern to you is how are we looking 3 years down the road and 5 years down the road? And that's what we're going to concentrate a great deal of effort on this year. As we said, the budget is $181.8 million, revenues $178. Expenditures and revenues, they produce a balanced budget when you add in the cash available. These are the 7 funds of the city. The general fund accounts for 44% of total expenditures citywide. You'll have, at the end of the year, we're projecting a $3.2 million deficit when you compare revenues to expenditures. There's also $14 million in cash available to meet that deficit. That deficit also doesn't take into consideration money that will recover from the American Rescue Plan in reimbursing the city for revenues lost due to COVID last year. There are 17 special revenue funds totaling $35 million in expenditures, $39 million in revenues. Special revenue funds are special funds that are created to track specific sources of revenue and specific expenditures. Primary revenue streams, there's property taxes that fund refuse collection, our garbage collection through the tax levy. are Tiff Districts and the grant funds. Primary sources of revenue for special revenue are grants, property taxes, and incremental taxes through the Tiff Districts. The special revenue funds, one is the home rule sales tax infrastructure. That's going to, when the city introduced an increase to home rule sales tax of 1% back in 2018, it pledged 2/3 of those revenues for infrastructure, for our streets and our sidewalks. An eligible use of that money is to spend money directly from that fund or to transfer it to the street and sidewalk fund. And in fiscal year 22, they'll be transferring $2,026,000 to debt service. Also, part of the money will be used to pay debt service on bonds that were issued for street projects. Also, there's a TIF district that will transfer, and that's McCaw Park, will transfer $2,883,000 to pay the principal and interest on the TIF debt. TIF bonds are issued to support McCaw Park and reimburse the developer with a TIF note paid solely from incremental taxes in the TIF district. It'll never be an obligation of the city. Capital projects, it's a lower sum this year compared to last year due to the fact that we spent down the bond proceeds that are made available through the 2018 A and B bonds. Remaining is $4,145,000. That'll be used for about $2.6 million will be used for streets and sidewalks and alleys. Another sum for sidewalk programs. Another sum of $500,000 for public works equipment, one-ton truck and an excavator, so the department can continue to do its own street projects. Enterprise funds are funds that are conducted as a business would be. Here we have the Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund. It generates its own money. It pays its own bills. It's extremely liquid with about $40 million in cash and investments. Although the expenditures will exceed revenues in enterprise funds, it's a very liquid fund. It'll cover its own. It'll offset its own deficit with cash on hand. The other enterprise fund is a parking system, runs a parking garage and all the metered lots. There's within the enterprise fund there will be certain capital projects funded, about $9 million, about $9.4 million through water and sewer revenues to make improvements to the facility, to maintain our water mains, sewer lines, and hopefully start to take those lines out to the further regions of the geographic region of the city so that we can start selling water to neighboring communities. At least that's the plan. The parking system will make improvements to the parking garage, using up the rest of its money from a parking fee revenue bond. Internal service funds are funds that provide services to other departments and funds of the city. Revenues are generated within the individual departments. Expenditures are shown within those departments that transfer monies to the internal service fund. So it's basically a wash in terms of the revenues and expenditures in the internal service fund, such as risk management for workers' comp and general liability. Each of the departments make a premium payment payable to the internal service fund, pays the premiums and any claim expenses. Another internal service fund is the information technology department. It provides IT services citywide to all the departments, to 911 center. Each of the departments is budgeted a share of on a pro ratio, on a proportionate basis, usually based on number of workstations. And it makes those payments to the internal service funds, which in turn provides the services and provides the equipment. The other internal service fund is funded through employee-paid premiums and city-paid premiums into the health insurance fund. Employees pay 10% of the premium cost. The city covers 90% of the cost. It also covers insurance claims of retirees. Retirees pay the lion's share of that premium. Since 2014, retirees pay 100% of their premium to participate in the group plan. Prior to that, it's on a percentage basis. Fiduciary funds are funds that the city serves as an agent, as a trustee. We have fiduciary responsibilities to the police pension and the fire pension fund. The other fiduciary fund is the working cash fund, where the city holds the stabilization fund money. Some people look at the stabilization fund as a rainy day fund. It is more than a rainy day fund. We do not use the stabilization fund to hit short-term little rainy day expenses. It's more of a fund to help us through catastrophic emergencies, where there's really a hit on expenditures due to a major catastrophic event. We have a stabilization fund that's going to hold 8% of general fund expenditures within that fund. Right now, there's $8.9 million sitting in that stabilization fund. We have not budgeted any of that money for use. It's going to sit in the stabilization fund.
So anyway, that's a big thing.
The police pension and the fire pension are funded through three sources. Employees pay a certain percentage of their salary, investment earnings on the monies that are invested by a professional manager. Any shortfall is made up by the city through its annual tax levy. There is held an annual actuarial evaluation. The city is told how much to contribute to the fund, so the fund is completely 90% funded by the year 2040. The chart on the screen now shows that even though you have deficits in these funds, the deficits are clearly covered by the liquid assets held in cash in those funds. There is no deficit that's going to show and be any responsibility of the city. There's available unassigned cash for that purpose. Okay. In terms of the funds, we don't just create 7 budgets. There's actually 87 different budgets being created by the finance department and working with our departments. The general fund has 7 particular departments or agencies, but within that are 31 different budgets that are created. There's 20 funds created within the special revenue funds, 11 debt service funds. Debt service funds had outstanding principal at the end of last year of $78 million in terms of general government debt. That's paid by property taxes, by abatements by using TIF incremental revenues, and by sales taxes. This year we will pay down a little over $10 million in principal and the rest in interest for $14.3 million. Capital projects, there's 2 capital project funds. There's a fixed asset replacement fund and a street and sidewalk capital project fund. They're both using up revenues that were produced by a bond issue in 2018. There's 2 enterprise funds with 6 budgets. There's a budget for operations, there's a budget for capital projects, there's a budget for debt service on revenue bonds that were issued for the water and sewer enterprise fund and for the parking system. There are 4 internal service funds with budgets. There's a police pension, the fire pension, the working cash fund, and a cemetery trust fund, which is a permanent fund, that can never use its principal. It always has to maintain its principal balance, and that's for the maintenance of the public cemetery. And all total are 87 individual budgets with a total budget of $181.8 million. In terms of where the money comes from, primarily money in local units of government, like government in general, comes from taxes. And we call all these sources taxes when really many of them are user fees. We call taxes because we're not the one providing the service. Instead, we tax the service and we collect a fee, such as a hotel motel tax. We can't charge a fee. We're not operating the hotel, but we charge a tax. $111 million of the 178 will come from taxes. Primary taxes are sales taxes, and the city had its finest year in terms of sales taxes last fiscal year. It generated $10.3 million on retail sales. There may have been a loss in sales from restaurants and bars, eating and drinking establishments, and other sources, but it was offset by increases in lumber and building materials where people stayed home, they made improvements, they spent a lot of money in hardware. Also, grocers had a banner year and contributed mightily to the sales tax. Included in that also is home rule sales tax, generates about $9 million. Income tax, another $9.3 million. And a number of lower taxes, but combined, they total $111 million citywide. Next would be the amount we receive from intergovernmental support. Those are primarily federal and state grants. The largest ones being for the fiscal year 22 is the amount that we expect that we will receive and have received half of already from the American Rescue Plan. That money goes to local units of government, the tribals, organizations, the school districts. The local share for Waukegan is just under $20 million. We received $9.8 million this year. We'll receive an equal sum next year. We've identified certain uses already. We've identified $2 million in HVAC and air quality improvements to our public buildings, which is an eligible expense. We've also identified almost $4 million that can be released from that fund to reimburse the city for lost revenue due to COVID. The balance this year can be used on water and sewer related projects, which is an eligible expenditure. Expenditures have to be related to COVID. And lost revenue, water and sewer improvements, broadband infrastructure are eligible uses. We know we can identify easily the balance this year in water and sewer projects. Next year, the council will be looking at ways to spend another $9.8 million that's eligible with the COVID guidelines. We will continue to look at lost revenue in 2022 and 2023, which is eligible. So we have the rest of this year, we can identify any losses, if any, and the same for next year. Otherwise, there's certainly water and sewer projects and other projects that we may be able to identify. Another source of intergovernmental revenue is what we receive annually from community development block grant. The block grant funds, $1.6 million. The rest is a number of grants received by the police department and the fire department for public safety. The pension contributions, you can see that's how much is contributed to the pension funds by the city and by the employees who actively participate. The rest of the funds, water and sewer, $14 million we expect in revenue. Licenses, permits, fees will contribute another $10 million. You can see the bulk heavily weighted towards for taxes, which account for over 63% of total citywide revenues. Okay. In terms of where the money goes, there's a high concentration of money for public safety purposes. Police and fire, out of 181 total budget, will receive funding of $85 million. Next, you're going to see expenditures for streets, bridges, public works projects for $14 million. Principal retirement on outstanding debt. That's not only general obligation debt, but it's also revenue debt of the water and sewer and the parking facility. Will receive funds for $11 million retired debt. $13 million total in capital projects. About $9.3 million in water and sewer projects. We saw the $4.2 million for streets, sidewalks, alleys, and equipment purchases out of capital project funds. The American Rescue Plan you see at the very end, the $9.8 million as part of the total $181.8 million budget. Okay. The general fund, the primary operating fund of the city, that's for the primary departments that provide the daily basic services. The building department, zoning, planning, development, police, fire, public works is funded within the general fund. 88% of the general fund budget is spent on those three highly visible departments that it basically calls for services by the people, by the citizens. They want strong police protection, fire services, emergency services, their highways and their streets, their alleys maintained. 88% of the budget goes for those services. Police will see, what was that, 38 million? Fire, 25 million. Streets, roadways, 7 million. In terms of by function, we are a service provider. Service providers have the principal cause of their expenditures is personnel. It takes people to provide the services. It takes police officers, it takes firefighters, it takes public works employees, it takes employees in town hall, in city hall here to provide those services. 88% of the general fund budget is personnel cost related. $40 million in personnel wages, overtime, another $30 million for hospitalization, workers' comp, liability, life insurance benefits. A small amount for non-personnel related, for contractual services, commodities, and supplies. So if you're looking to reduce a general fund budget, you have to reduce people. And who are you going to replace? You're going to reduce the size of your police department, your fire department, your public works employees? If you do so, who provides the service? Budgeting in local government is a difficult process. You're taking limited resources and you're spreading it out as best you can to provide the services and still maintain a highly trained employee base. That's the breakdown by function. Okay. Revenue, 80% of revenue in the general fund is provided by taxes. Again, what goes into the general fund budget? Income taxes, sales taxes, home rule sales taxes, hotel motel taxes, personal property replacement taxes, which is a tax paid by corporations when the local units of government was denied the right to, when it was eliminated back in 1978, 1979, to tax the personal property of corporations and trusts and partnerships. They put a replacement tax on that. And utility taxes of 5% of the gross receipts. So taxes make up 80%. Permits will make up, what is that, 3.6%. Basic fees, charges for services that are provided by general fund. There's a fee, there's a user fee charge. You use the service, you pay a fee. And it accounts for 5% of those revenues. Okay. We don't need to get into all the revenue, special revenue funds. There's 17 of them. $39 million in expenditures, $25 million. I'm sorry, $25 million in expenditures, $39 million in revenues. Included is budgets for 3 Tiff districts that will actively show expenditures in this year for improvements to Seahorse Drive and to the parking fund. Okay. Capital projects, we talked about those already. There's only 2 capital project funds. Streets and sidewalks for $3.6 million, and another $500,000 for public works equipment. Debt service funds, you currently have 11 outstanding general obligation type debt service funds. These are bonds that were issued for public improvements, for streets, highways, alleys. They're paid off by property taxes that are extended by the county on an annual basis, unless those taxes are abated and you identify an alternative source. We've identified TIF money that can be used to abate a portion of the debt service requirement, and also home rule sales tax that will abate a good portion of that debt. You can see that home rule sales tax will use $2 million, and McGraw Park TIF another almost $3 million. Sorry, we're missing a 3 there. It should be 2 million, or I'm missing an 8. It's 2,883,000. Okay. You can see that there's, of these outstanding debt, there's a $78 million obligation or outstanding at the end of last year. We'll reduce it by $10.5 million in the new year. 3 of these debt service funds will be totally retired next year in fiscal year 23. We'll be down to 8. Enterprise funds, we talked about them. They're water and sewer and in the parking system. They generate their own money. They pay their own bills. There's never an obligation to the taxpayer. Operations, $11.4 million in water and sewer. $9.3 million in capital project expenses. Continued improvements to the facility. Water main replacements, sewer improvements. In the parking system, $1.3 million in resources, $1.3 million in expenditures. It'll retire principal on parking bonds and also principal on outstanding lease. Internal service funds, those are funds that pay into an internal service fund for the provision of services to different departments. The only one that's going to show in expenditures is the employee benefit plan, which is the health insurance fund. Again, it's paid by city contributions and employee premium contributions, and contributions by retirees. Fiduciary, primarily the police and fire pension fund, $16,250,000 in planned expenditures in fiscal year 22. And that's to cover the pension benefits payable to the retired police and fire personnel. Police officers that actively employed now pay 9.9% of their salary into the fund. Firefighters pay 9.45%. We expect to gain certain earnings from our investments of 5.2 in police, 2.9 in fire. Our actuary did an evaluation of funds and basically told the city how much you need to levy and how much the city needs to put into funds so that the funds are 90% funded by the year 2040, which is set by statute. And the city's obligation is part of the levy from 2020, payable this year into the fund. Okay. Our police pension and fire pension are both funded under 50%. They're under 50% funded. Better than the state as a whole. As you know, the pension funds in the state of Illinois are in dire trouble, which is why the legislature put a statute requiring that they be 90% funded by the year 2040. We are on track to do that. The city has provided a number to levy. We levy that number. We'll be 90% funded by 2040. There is no fear of our firefighters or police officers not having a pension. They will have a pension. Inactive members right now collecting a pension for the police pension, you can see there's 148 currently receiving a pension. 32 are inactive, but they're not quite receiving it, probably because of age. But they're eligible. There's 143 active employees paying into the fund. So there's 148 receiving benefits. Another 32 are eligible, and only 143 are paying into the plan. So you know you have to make up the difference through investment earnings or through the tax levy by the city. In the case of fire, 125 are currently receiving those benefits, and there's 115 paying into the plan. So there's more people receiving benefits than paying into the plan. You know what happens when that's the case. The contribution required, if investment earnings go down, the city's contribution will go up. In terms of a percentage of the salary, you can see how much as a percentage of salary is paid into the plan. 59% of salary for police pension, 57% of fire pension. as a percentage of the salary is paid into the plan. Okay. Finally, TIF districts. We have 3 active TIF districts that are budgeted. The North Lakefront TIF, the Downtown TIF, and the South Lakefront TIF. They have incremental revenues. That is revenues that's produced by improvements within that TIF district that raised the taxable property value in that district greater than the district at the time of creation. The incremental taxes in TIF 7, $110,000 will be produced in this year. $460,000 in the downtown TIF, $90,000 in the South Lakefront TIF. Planned improvements, $430,000 within 7, $1.2 million in 8, and 9. These are contiguous districts, which means you can take money from one district and spend it in another district as long as they join each other. You treat it as one large district. And these monies will all be pooled, and they're going to pay for the improvements of Seahorse Drive and finish off the facility improvements at the parking garage. You can see how much the value, what those TIF districts are valued at the time they were created. 3 of them were created in 2014, 1 in 2015. And that the second column there, initial EAV, that's the initial value of that property within that TIF at the time of creation. The value in that third column, what's the value as of April 30th, 2020? Next column shows how much the TIF district has increased in value because of money put back into that district in the form of improvements, both by the city of Waukegan and by private developers. There's been private and public monies going into that district to improve the value of the property, improve the taxable value, and you can see TIF 7 has improved 23%, TIF 8, 26%, TIF 9, 23%. McGaw Park has improved in value 273%. And that'll only go higher when we have the complete culmination of the development funded through the 20, or at least we're helping the developers with the 21 A and B bonds paid back solely through incremental increases in the value of that property. That, in brief, is the $181.8 million citywide budget and its funding sources. If you have any questions, we can entertain questions, or I may have confused you enough that you don't have questions.
All right, Alderman, are there any questions from any of you regarding the PowerPoint?
Just a quick comment, Chairman. Thank
Yes,
the
Alderman
Finance
Moisey.
Department for doing this. Is an arduous task, as you can see. It's not an easy task. And the department heads and everybody that came together to try to make this work. And I appreciate the Finance Department and Don Schultz coming back to help us out. But as you can see, this is a very arduous task. Trying to stretch a dollar. 18 years, I feel like that's all I've done up here is try to stretch a dollar. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman.
Are there any more comments? Okay, item 3, reports and communications. Being none, I take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Alderman Florian,
I'll second.
Alderman Rivera. We are adjourned at 7:22 p.m.